I grew up in the 1960s and 70s at home with my parents and my two brothers. And looking back now on those years at home, I would say ours was a fairly healthy family life. We were blessed to not have any major troubles at all. Yeah, my brothers and I caused grief for my parents lots of times. We got into trouble in the neighborhood or in school. That happened. And my parents argued, of course, from time to time. But we were a pretty functional family as far as I'm concerned. But I realized, looking back in those years, that there was something missing. And what was missing was that nobody that I can remember ever said to the other person, "I love you." It's interesting. I mean, first of all, I could tell you with certainty that my brothers and I never said "I love you" to each other, okay? If I had said that to my brothers, they would say, "Get out of here, you're freaking me out," okay? All right? But I never remember my parents even saying those words to us. And I think it's because they were raised in a generation where you didn't show your feelings. You didn't express your affection in that way. You know, they provided for us, and they were good to us, and they loved us, no doubt about it. But I never heard those words. And I did not hear my parents say that to each other, because they were very, very private about any signs of affection. That's just the way it was. And maybe I'm thinking some of you, maybe a lot of you, grew up in a family where saying "I love you" was not something that was done. So when I became aware of this is when I was a priest, and I would be visiting people's homes, having dinner, blessing their house or something, and I'd be there when the parents are putting their kids to bed. And the parents would say a prayer, of course, with them, and then they would always tell their children, "I love you." And the child would say back, "I love you too, Mom," or "I love you too, Dad." That was like foreign to me. And it was so cool that they could say that to each other. Maybe some of you have that practice yourselves. Or I would hear people talking on the phone to their loved ones, about anything. But they always ended their conversation by saying, "I love you," and they would say, "I love you." And I will say this too, that it took me by surprise when in my ministry people would send me cards and on various occasions, and they would write, "I love you," or "We love you, Father Perry." It still seems a little bit strange to me because it's not the way I grew up. So I'm thinking, whether we know it or not, it is helpful to hear those words. And I think it's not only helpful, but probably necessary in our faith lives. My first years of ministry, I was in a little parish, and sometimes couples would come in with issues. And I wasn't really used to doing marital counseling. I was never trained in that kind of warfare, okay? And these people would be sitting in front of me like going at each other. It's like, it's almost time, thank God. But I was talking to one couple one time, and the wife all of a sudden just said to her, she said, "You never tell me you love me. I don't even know if you love me." And he said, "What are you talking about?" The husband. "Look what I do. The home we live in, I put food on the table. The kids are going to nice schools." "What do you mean?" She goes, "Thank you for that. But you never say you love me. Do you love me?" And he said, "Well, what do I have to do? Like say it every day?" And she said, "That would be nice, yeah." And he just kind of stopped and said, "Well, yeah, I could do that." And they're happily married. I'm assuming things went better. Maybe a little awkward at first if you're not used to saying it, but it became part of their language, the language of marriage, the language of love. In the gospel today, we are going to the end of John's gospel. Jesus was already raised from the dead. He's appeared to his disciples on 2 different occasions. This is the 3rd. And at some point, I think the disciples were still confused and couldn't get it into their head that Jesus was alive again. So what do? You fall back on what's familiar and comfortable. Peter says, "I'm going to go fishing." That's what he did. So he and the disciples go fishing, and they see somebody on the shore 100 yards away. The person says, "Hey, have you caught anything?" They go, "No, nothing." "Throw your nets over the right side." And they take in this huge catch of fish. And that's when one of them realizes, that's the Lord. And Peter jumps in the water, goes to the shore, and they come in with all the fish. And Jesus has a little fish barbecue going on for them. Some tilapia and red snapper or something. Capers and butter. Nobody says anything. Awkward silence. Because they knew it was him, so they didn't say anything. They didn't ask. Then after that, here's where Jesus goes deep. He says to Peter, "Peter, do you love me?" I don't know what it would have been like for two men to be talking like that in Jesus' day. Maybe it was common. Peter says, "Yeah, Lord, you know I love you." And then again, "Peter, do you love me?" He says, "Yes, Lord, you know I love you." And then a third time, "Peter, do you love me?" And now Peter's troubled that Jesus has had to ask a third time. And he says to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Why would Jesus ask Peter the same question 3 times? Some commentators on the Bible say that Peter denied knowing Jesus 3 times the night he died, before he died. And so now Jesus is making amends with Peter, reconciling by asking him 3 times, "Do you love me?" But you know what I think? When you ask somebody a question like that for the first time, most people don't hear it. Like, "Hey, Father Perry, how you doing?" "Fine." "Father Perry, how are you doing, really?" "I'm fine." No, come on. "How are you doing?" "Well, let me tell you." So the question repeats itself and sinks deeper and deeper into the person who is listening. Jesus has to move Peter to a soul moment where he expresses his love sincerely. Jesus has to break through all that stuff that's going on in Peter, his ego and his pride, his shame, his humiliation for what he did. And then when Jesus brings Peter to the moment where he says, "Lord, you know everything. You know I love you." Then Jesus says, "Follow me." You know, Jesus had said that to Peter 3 years earlier. He met him fishing. And he told Peter, "Follow me." And Peter dropped everything. But I don't think Peter knew what was going on and what it would be like and what would be involved. He stumbled. Now after the resurrection, Jesus repeats the call. Peter has expressed his love. He knows what it means to follow. And Jesus even hints at the kind of death Peter will suffer because he is a follower of Christ. So in a sense, I think this scene is that Peter and Jesus have some unfinished business to take care of. Peter needed to be reconciled to Jesus. Jesus could have said, "You know what? You really let me down. You really let me down." He could have said, "I thought you would be loyal, but obviously not." But Jesus is not punishing Peter. He takes the initiative because he knows that reconciliation is important. He needs to know that Peter's love for him is real if Peter is going to follow and do what he has to do in time. Wouldn't it be great if when we had an issue with somebody that we could resolve it in that way? You know, what happens when somebody hurts you or betrays you or does something harmful to you or your loved ones? Most of us want some kind of revenge, or we want that person to apologize and make amends. That's okay. But shouldn't the real question be like, do you love me or not? If a spouse has been unfaithful, isn't it true that the other partner would probably want that spouse to ask for forgiveness and show that they will be faithful, maybe get counseling, maybe move out for a while, whatever the case may be. But maybe the real question that remains unanswered sometimes is, does my spouse love me? In spite of everything that's happened, the betrayal, the hurt, the lack of fidelity, doesn't the victim want to know whether their spouse really loves them? Or let's say your